Okay, good. Well, I want to say that I'm very happy to be here. Henry Schuckman, I consider him a teacher, and he's becoming a friend as well, which is a great pleasure and honor for me. And I welcome all of you, including those of you who've come in from being on my list for our Wednesday meditation program. And so let's begin. I will not, while I have a lot of respect for Zen, I don't have deep roots in it, so I won't pretend to be Zen-like or Zen-light. But I do think you'll find perhaps some intersections between the meditation that I'll be guiding here and also what I hope to talk about, which are brain savvy, spaciousness and contentment. Spaciousness and contentment as fundamental means to the ends of practice and ends in of themselves, with a lot of overlap between the early teachings of the Buddha about spaciousness and contentment and the development of those teachings over the next 2,500 years, including through their streams that move through China and Japan, and then here in the West, that certainly includes Zen very prominently. So let's begin. Find a posture that helps you be comfortable and alert. Finding a position of balance, soft in the front, upright in the back. Sitting, standing, walking, or lying down. With your eyes open or closed, be in touch with your body. You might like to scan it, including perhaps from your feet to your head, or down from your head to your feet. And as you explore your body, that can naturally help you further establish your place here and now. Refining your position, letting go of any tension in your jaw muscles, your eyes, your belly, and coming home in this place, in this present, breath after breath. Staying in touch with your body and the feeling of breathing. As you become increasingly established in the present, there can be a natural letting go of tension in the body, a letting go of any sense of pressure or contraction in the mind. No need to get anything done right now. You can simply be. Allowing sounds, sights, thoughts to arise and pass through awareness while you remain present, not following after anything or resisting anything. Simply being open and spacious. As you are established in the present, you may be aware of a fundamental open-heartedness, warm-heartedness, perhaps in the background of awareness. And this quality of heart can be found in or gently invited into your spacious presence. Warm-hearted, open presence. Being established as you are increasingly established in this. Warm-hearted, open presence. Let awareness extend in all directions. If your eyes are open, getting a sense of the whole space you're in, a wide perceptual frame. See what it's like to rest in this openness, extending in all directions, allowing experiences to continually arise and pass away. And as you rest in openness, awareness extending in all directions in the present, be mindful of the subtle sense of there being enough already or not in the present. See if you can increasingly let go of any unnecessary discontent in the present, including subtleties of pressure, contraction, or craving, worry, or anger, letting these go and seeing if you can find a genuine feeling of contentment in the present, of enough already, Nothing missing, nothing wrong in the present. Being mindful of this, and as you can, becoming increasingly absorbed and rested in a sense of warm-hearted, spacious contentment in the present. This may sound complicated, but it's actually our natural home when we are undisturbed and nothing is wanting, nothing is missing in the present. Warm-hearted, spacious contentment. This contentment can contain pain, sorrow, a background feeling of one kind or another. But beneath all that, fundamentally in the core of your being, there can be an enoughness already in the present. We can take the feeling of enough already as our object of meditation. In this last minute, you might like to open your eyes, if they're not already open, beginning to move a little, and seeing if you can maintain a sense of openness, spaciousness, while also feeling unpressured, undriven, and content.
Great. Hold on. So welcome everyone again to this Thursday night at Mountain Cloud, special Thursday for us. So deeply pleased to have Rick Hanson here tonight. And as it happens, Henry was invited again to this mountain cave, which is a wonderful opportunity high up above the Santa Fe area. And so he is doing some mountain still sitting with us, for us, with the whole world. But Henry sent a message, and heartfelt. And this is really addressed to the Sangha, but that's all of us here. All of us. Dear Sangha, I'm so happy and honored to be able to introduce Dr. Rick Hanson to Mountain Cloud tonight. I confess I'm a little sad, says Henry, at not being able to join you right now, but mostly I'm just thrilled that we are being blessed by the great good fortune of hosting Rick. I first knew of Rick through his canonical book, Buddha's Brain, in which he brings together his skills and knowledge as a neuroscientist and psychologist with his deep experience as a Buddhist practitioner. It's a groundbreaking book on many levels, but it's also a wonderfully written book, a real joy to read. Personally, I also love and have learned a lot from Hardwiring Happiness and Neurodharma, two more of his superb works, which are enlightening, but also deeply compassionate. I've got to know Rick somewhat more closely this year. As you're about to find out, I actually think we already have. He's a wonderfully kind man who understands and cares deeply about our human sufferings. He's also a very deep practitioner who knows the Theravada realm of practice thoroughly and is humble enough to be exploring the Mahayana ways too now, and is even plunging into the wild waters of the Zen koans. Mm-hmm. You're going to have a wonderful time together, I have no doubt. With much gratitude and humility, welcome to Mountain Cloud, Rick. This speaks for all of us. Welcome.
I wish I had some wooden blocks here. Whew. Well, thank you. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone here. I stumbled upon Henry through his magnificent book, really, One Blade of Grass, and that was a portal into a tremendous stream of teaching and wisdom that has actually lifted me personally over the last year. And Henry's really remarkable, and as you can tell from his own writing, he's a beautiful writer and immensely gracious. And I think about the wild waters of koans. I don't know, what arose in my mind there, very responsive to koan, like, what's the fundamental koan? What? WT. What? Question mark, exclamation point. What? And I think that's really wonderful. And as I'll delve into in a moment, that quality of surprise, of shift of frame. What? is fundamental to the neurological underpinnings, the physical, biological, actually, objectively embodied underpinnings of so many awakenings and so many means or factors that support broadly the process of healing, growing, and awakening. This sense of being startled out of an old frame, startled off of an old road, as I talked about last night in our Wednesday program, moving out of the road of war and shifting to another path, call it the path of compassionate, calm strength. That shift, that jolt, is really, really effective. And it's part of what I hope to talk with you about tonight. So my understanding, basically, as a guest here in your setting, in your center, and I'm very appreciative as a guest and want to express my gratitude to my host here. My intent is to hold forth for around 20 or 25 minutes and then open it up for another 20 or so minutes, ballpark, for questions and discussion. And then we'll kind of see how the evening unfolds, particularly guided by Valerie and Mark, I think. That sounds like a plan? Okay, good. Online you have to sort of feel your way by glancing at the Zoom windows, and it's a little different from being in the flesh. Okay. So I hope to talk with you tonight, really emphasizing the element of practice within the framework of personal practice. I'd like to explore with you two ways of being that are also factors of awakening, which is to say, qualities of spaciousness and contentment. And I'll explain a little more what I mean by that. I have a bit of a sore throat, so if I cough from time to time, that's what's going on. So, by spaciousness, I mean both an inner and an outer kind of spaciousness. Inner spaciousness feels sort of open. The opposite of that spaciousness would be contraction, one of the forms of which is identification, being sort of hijacked by an emotional reaction. They do something, they say something, something happens, we get plugged in, as we used to say in the 70s, reactivated, carried away by it. Or we take a firm position. I'm right, you're wrong. I'm better, you're worse. I know, you don't. We're identified with that which is in effect a part of the stream of consciousness. The opposite of that essentially is moving out into the whole field. For example, being aware of the body as a whole, distinct from being focused on a particular part of it. Now, let's be clear, there's a place for focusing on parts. One of the great developments of the last 1,000 years, especially the last several hundred years, has been the evolution of science, which has very, very strongly an analytical strategy that takes things apart into their component parts and then understands them very, very deeply and then reassembles them into a larger whole. There's a place for sorting out what do I need to do with the parts, sort of focusing on particular aspects of your own consciousness. But much of the time, what's that feel like? It feels contracted, often stressed. That sense of contracting around or identifying with a particular part of yourself or a particular part of the ongoing streaming of consciousness is a necessary condition for the craving identified by the Buddha 2,500 years ago, the craving that is such a major source of our suffering and the harms we do with other people. It's when we feel caught up with the part of ourselves that's criticizing us that we suffer. It's when we get caught up with some particular object of desire. I must have that cookie. I must have that drink. I must have that experience. We're caught up with a part as a condition of craving. In our wrangles with other people, the necessary condition, a requirement for getting into a tangle with other people is some investment in, whether it's deserved or not, but just objectively as a condition, a necessary condition for conflicts with other people, including just inside our own mind, the war inside our heads, right? A condition for that is a fixation on, an identification with, being swallowed up by, being glued to some part inside ourselves. So the alternative to that, a lot, is a quality of spaciousness. That could be the spaciousness of awareness, in which the various parts of the stream of consciousness can unfold within a felt sense of an open field. That's good. That's effective. That's helpful. And in that sense of open awareness certainly can be compassion for the painful feelings or the weariness or the stresses or losses that are moving along in the stream of consciousness. Right. So we have the spaciousness of awareness itself. There can be a sense of the spaciousness of the totality of consciousness, the mind process as a whole. There's a sense of a spaciousness there. There can be a sense of a kind of bird's eye view, a kind of perspective, a panoramic view of our own difficulties. And as we open into the whole field of awareness, as we abide as the mind altogether, as a whole, a single streaming of consciousness, what happens? Immediately, suffering diminishes. Confusion and ignorance diminishes. One reason for that is when we go into a more spacious view, a wider perceptual field in various kinds of ways, we take in more information. We're less positional. We see the whole in which the various parts fit. Spaciousness, that inner spaciousness, is a real value. Feels good. Additionally, as I mentioned, we can recognize an external spaciousness. This can get a little more complicated, but it's essentially quite simple. You can imagine any experience you've had. You can do it right now, where you lift your gaze to the horizon and you start seeing things as a whole. The whole room, the whole volume of space that you're in, objectively. Notice what happens to your own state of being when you recognize spaciousness externally. And then you can extend that further, and you start to get a sense of, oh, this room or building I'm in is really part of a larger whole that extends all the way out to the horizon line and beyond. In our imagination, we can know that this larger whole includes the entire planet. We start having more of a sense of the space, the spaciousness, the larger whole that's external includes all of life. So that our own life, our own unfolding, is recognized more as we discern, as we see the fact, the simple, direct, clear fact, no hocus pocus involved, of the vastness, the largeness of the whole environment, extending even further out into space. The moon, the sun, the planets, the stars, the Milky Way, and on, all the way on outward into this vast, blossoming, unfolding universe containing, ballpark, a couple trillion galaxies like our own, each one, ballpark, with 100 billion or so stars, many of which scientists are now discovering have planets of various kinds orbiting them. Wow. That might be, by the way, another root koan alongside what is wow. Wow. And as we discern that spaciousness outside ourselves, and as we discern it inside ourselves, as practice matures, and there are a lot of people involved here with us right now who have been at it for a while, or have a natural depth of practice that they started with. I had to work at it for a while, although I definitely did have some intuitions of truth from the beginning. I had to work at it. You start to recognize that the external spaciousness and the internal spaciousness have the same nature. Whether it's the internal totality of consciousness, the entirety of that, or it's the external totality, really, of the whole Big Bang universe and everything in it, both inside and outside have the same nature, as everything is connected and changing and dynamically related, so that, in the Sanskrit term, shunyata, there's a fundamental openness, sometimes translated as emptiness, as an inherent feature, as the nature of internal and external phenomena. Inside, outside, same. One field, fundamentally, in which mind and matter are unfolding. That recognition is sweet and helpful as we recognize the spaciousness inside and outside and the common nature of spaciousness inside and outside. Our contractions open, our heart opens. Maybe just about myself, but we become less of a jerk, kind of. We tread more lightly here in this world. So how can we support the gradual establishment of this quality of spaciousness inside ourselves, along with this recognition of the larger spaciousness that we're part of? You may know the statement from the great Tibetan sage Milarepa, who described his life of practice as, in the beginning nothing came, in the middle nothing stayed, in the end nothing left. How can we help this progression in ourselves, let's say, with regard to spaciousness? Here's where there are two pieces of information that have emerged just in the last half dozen years, probably, just certainly the last decade or so, about your own brain and the ways in which your brain is involved in the ongoing constructing of the streaming of consciousness. The neuroscientist Sherrington described the brain as like an enchanted loom continually weaving the tapestry of consciousness. So, not to reduce the entirety of consciousness to the activity of the brain, and definitely there are mysteries that remain, but certainly there's some serious correlations here, some real correlations here that we can make use of. So, the neural correlates, there are two key neural correlates, things happening inside the 3 pounds of tofu-like tissue and inside the coconut. There are two kinds of things happening there when you're feeling spacious and open with all that is. And by being aware of what these two things are, that can kind of help practice, that can enhance practice. It doesn't replace practice, traditional practices, but knowing a little bit about the ongoing dependent arising, the neurologically dependent arising of the streaming of consciousness can be very useful. So specifically, when we're caught up with parts inside ourselves, or we're fixated on something outside of ourselves that's just part of the whole, a particular expression on a person's face, or a particular sentence or two in an email that's come at us, right? When we're fixated on parts, inside or outside, we tend to activate a strip of cortex in the midline of the brain toward the top, the frontal regions of which are involved in doing tasks, the rearward regions of cortex being involved in more spacing out, fantasizing, ruminating, etc. And in both cases, we're caught up often in what's called mental time travel, into the future or the past, not in the present. So, the neurological basis of so much of our suffering is midline cortical activation. That's a mouthful with enormous implications. The neurological basis of so much of our suffering is heightened activation in this midline strip of cortical tissue. Now we need that strip of cortical tissue. It's a phenomenal evolutionary development just over the last couple million years, really. We really need that strip because it helps us to plan for the future and reflect upon the past and make sense of things. On the other hand, it can get us into a lot of trouble, can't it? To be caught up in the future or caught up in the past with various parts struggling with other parts with little sense of things as a whole in the present. So what can help to reduce the hijacking and the kind of tyranny, frankly, of midline cortical activation, which, be real about it, is intensively trained in modern civilization, quote-unquote civilization, traditional conventional schooling, normal regular jobs, media, et cetera, are an intensive activation and reinforcement of neural circuitry in this midline. Neurons that fire together can wire together, and there's a lot of neuronal firing in this midline. What can we do about it? What scientists have found is that there are networks on the sides of the brain, particularly right-sided for right-handed people, probably switched for most left-handed people, in the right hemisphere, in other words, for right-handed people. And these systems, these networks, are connected like a seesaw. When one goes up and gets more powerful and active, it pushes the other one down, and vice versa. So, if we want to quiet the activity, at least for a time, in these midline networks, and come into the present with a greater sense of a whole, it really helps to encourage and activate and strengthen these lateral networks, lateral on the side, right-sided of the brain. Very pragmatic how to do that. A major way to do that is, guess what? To take a panoramic perspective. To have a sense of things as a whole. Your body as a whole as you breathe. So rather than just locating the breath at the upper lip, being aware of the chest as a whole as you breathe, expanding it to the body as a whole as you breathe. Or larger, a sense of the whole room or the whole field of awareness in an open way. That will tend to stimulate and strengthen these lateral networks on the right side. Another thing that activates these right-sided lateral networks is a sense of what? It's a sense of surprise, a sense of novelty or freshness, beginner's mind, don't know mind, eyes of a child mind, a feeling of freshness at the emergent arising of now, continually bubbling up like a mountain spring. That sense of immediacy, which for me feels so Zen in so many wonderful ways, that sense of immediacy and suchness and things as they are, in the immediacy, the palpable, intensity even, almost ecstatic sometimes, immediacy of the arising present naturally supports stimulation and strengthening of these right-sided neural networks, which then can help, as they get stronger and stronger, us to abide increasingly in a sense of spaciousness, or be able to move into it when it's appropriate, and move back and forth from what we might call, broadly, the doing mode of sorts, in which we're caught up in doing, maybe for functional reasons, or being mode, which is more lateral and more right-sided, when we're simply present spaciously. So panoramic perspective, sense of freshness, also, which includes a willingness to not know, all right? And also, as we relieve or release the sense of self, we tend to abide increasingly in this more laterally centered way of being. And with repeated practice, with regular mindfulness practice, which often implicitly includes some of these qualities of a sense of vastness or openness or spaciousness and not knowing in the present, literally there's research that shows that people routinely activate these right-sided networks more and can increasingly rest there. And there's a whole body of work from the neuroscientist Norm Farb, F-A-R-B, who's developed a lot of this research. So that's one. That's kind of one brain hack. A second brain hack, kind of briefly here, for spaciousness, is to move your eyes to the horizon. And you can just kind of watch what happens, that there's a movement from what's called an egocentric perceptual frame with objects that are close. Because as our ancestors evolved, friend or foe, are you going to eat me or can I eat you? It has to do with things that are closer, right? Which is to say self-referential. But if we move our gaze out to the horizon and even above, there's naturally a shift of consciousness, naturally a shift of a state of being in which there's more of a feeling of the objective totality of everything in a more impersonal way. Doesn't have so much sense of taking things personally. So the simple activity of physically taking a wider view, moving your gaze to the horizon, or in your own imagination, finding a larger panoramic perspective with more of a freshness, a sense of appreciating the novelty, the not knowingness of what's arising. Both of those are neurologically grounded things you can do to strengthen the sense of spaciousness over time, so that increasingly it becomes the habit of your heart. And as Milarepa put it, it doesn't leave increasingly. So I want to finish by just talking a bit about contentment. And to be clear, any kind of suggestion or prompt I offer to try to evoke a certain kind of experience is just my own way. And feel really free to find your own ways or your own words. Maybe the word contentment doesn't speak to you. Maybe there are other words that have to do with this sense of little or no craving in the present. That feeling, little or no aversion, little or no grasping, little or no clinging to other people, little or no sense of being separated or beleaguered or put upon or bereft or depleted. And as those fall away, as discontent falls away, increasingly there's a sense of contentment. So find your own words for this, whatever they may be, and that also speaks to a broader point. My own perspective is just my own. It's a perspective that in a variety of ways is privileged in our culture, Western and American culture, white, male, educated, middle class, upper middle class, professional. And so I want to really encourage other kinds of perspectives, other kinds of voices that are maybe certainly have not been so advantaged or privileged as my own, to really round out the whole conversation. And I just kind of want to acknowledge the particularity of my own perspective while knowing that there are many others. That said, contentment. It's interesting that in the Theravadan roots of the great tree of Buddhism, almost everything that's taught there is very psychological. It's not metaphysical. In a decent translation, it's, you can kind of pull it out of its cultural frame pretty directly. You kind of really get at. Think of the Buddha perhaps as a master psychologist, penetrating, profound analysis of the nature of the mind and the roots of our own suffering. As you probably know, in the Four Noble Truths, the Four Ennobling Truths, the second of these is that our craving is is the condition upon which most, certainly, of our suffering arises. So the question then becomes, what are the conditions upon which craving arises? If craving, broadly, is a cause of suffering, what are the causes of craving? Why do we crave? What a dumb idea. What were we thinking? Well, we crave for a reason. We crave biologically. We crave because it's a very effective way to motivate animals, including big animals in the Stone Age or back in Jurassic Park or 500 million years ago, after the nervous system had already been evolving for 100 million years before that. Craving is a very effective way to prod animals to do things that pass on genes that pass on genes, with a lot of collateral damage, a lot of suffering along the way. So we crave. There is a powerful biological machinery of craving within us. What causes people to crave? Rather than meet their challenges without craving. Just because there's a challenge, just because there's a threat, or just because there's a goal that we're seeking to attain, or just because there's a relationship, even an issue in a relationship, doesn't necessarily mean that we need to fall into the craving that's typified by, broadly, fear, anger, helplessness, in a word, hatred, or typified by frustration, disappointment, or addiction, in a word, greed. These are traditional terms, or kind of foregrounding some elements that are not so prominent in the deep roots of Buddhism. We can manage challenges in our relationships without resentment, without hostility, without vengeance, without shame, without craving, in a word. How do we actually do that? So a study of craving, its sources and its end, is absolutely central to liberation, fundamentally. To summarize a whole bunch of material and then open it up for discussion and some questions here, I hope. We crave biologically. Squirrels crave, cats crave, in their way, flies crave. They don't crave with the full layers of self-awareness that humans have in our drivenness, or in our fighting or fleeing or freezing, or our jealousies, our envies, our self-hatred. The lizards don't get that complicated, but the fundamental machinery, biologically, the fundamental hardware under the hood, in your body, headquartered above, in your head, the fundamental machinery is the same. Craving is based on an invasive sense of something missing or wrong, deficit or disturbance in the meeting of an important need. Pure and simple. If our needs are met and feel met in the present, there's no basis actually for craving. There may be a habit of craving, and there may be a certain degree to which Mother Nature fosters delusional craving to keep us on our toes, just in case. Back during the Game of Thrones, and even before that. Okay, but there's no actual basis for craving, objectively, when our needs are met and we feel that they're met. This has profound implications, doesn't it? Obviously, it has external implications that at the level of social policy, we should do everything we can, realistically, to help people get their needs met, realistically, around the world, so that children and adults don't go hungry. People are not unhoused. We have a rule of law and civil society, a safety net, and so forth. Yes, we should do those things. Internally, we can grow psychological strengths of various kinds so that as we encounter challenges to our needs, we can cope with those challenges more effectively without feeling highly stressed or frightened or enraged or devastated or shamed with regard to them. We can build psychological muscles, inner strengths, resources of various kinds like grit, gratitude, insight, compassion, self-compassion. We can grow these strengths inside. As we grow these strengths inside, we're more able to meet challenges of life without an invasive sense of overwhelming deficit or disturbance in the meeting of our needs, and therefore without the craving that leads to suffering and harm. Wow. Building psychological strengths helps to fulfill the promise of the Buddha, to reduce and eventually cease without remainder. To quote the teaching in the Pali Canon, to cease without remainder the machinery of craving. What can help us, it's not the entirety of the path, but one thing that's very important and often underappreciated in my experience of the mindfulness and the Buddhist world broadly is the deliberate development of psychological resources inside in the service of reducing craving and promoting that highest happiness, which is peace. Second, and to finish here, as we repeatedly internalize the genuine sense of needs met enough in the moment, you're thirsty, there's something missing, okay? You drink a little water. Letting it really land. What's it feel like to get enough water in the moment? What's it feel like as you inhale to have enough air in the moment? When you're with a friend who's kind, appropriately, reasonably kind or attentive or with you, or just joking with you, is there enough connection in the moment? As you recognize that in this moment, whatever the future may hold, in the present, there's a basic alrightness, basic okayness. Survival is not in question in this moment. Can you feel that? As you feel gratitude, for what you have. Be nice to have more. Doesn't mean giving up. You can still aspire without attachment, hopefully. You can still aspire, though. Dream big dreams for others and for yourself. And yet still, simultaneously, there can be a sense of needs met enough already. As we repeatedly internalize, typically one mild and brief experience at a time, many times a day, as we repeatedly internalize the felt sense of needs met enough in the present, we build up in our neural networks, in emotional memory networks, and somatic memory networks, we build up an increasingly unconditional felt sense of resilient well-being, of a basic okayness and alrightness in the core of our being, no matter what's happening around us. And as we build up that underlying kind of ground of being, it feels content, feels peaceful and content and open-hearted in the present, then we've built up kind of a reservoir inside us so that when the challenges, the waves of life come, they don't knock us on our feet so much. Or if they do, we recover really rapidly. As if in the process I'm describing, we're kind of deepening a keel in our own personal sailboat in the water. So that as the waves, the challenges, and even the big storms of life come, as we've deepened this underlying, internalized, very embodied feeling, I'm summarizing as an underlying fundamental contentment, then our keel is deeper and we can manage bigger storms, bigger waves, and keep on sailing in the deep, dark blue. This contentment includes compassion. It includes a recognition of injustice, the sorrows of the world. It's not complacent, actually, as we have an increasingly unassailable, impenetrable core of underlying deep well-being, we get tougher, we get stronger, we mean business, we don't feel defeatable. We've had it with certain kinds of mistreatments out there in the world, and we're increasingly unafraid in moving forward to deal with it in part because we've built up this core of inner strength and resilient well-being that's with us wherever we go, never to leave. Okay. Thanks for letting me carry on here. Maybe a little over time. I think we still have time for questions, comments. I see what's come in through the chat. I kind of went for it in the spirit of Henry and the invitation from you, Valerie, and Mark. So I hope it was okay. And I'm really happy to respond to whatever comes up.
Just wonderful, Rick. Thank you so much. And we welcome questions, obviously. And there's one there in chat, or you could raise a hand. Rick, can you please speak to the relationship between craving and trauma?
Sure. Well, so by definition, trauma is an experience of catastrophic failure of needs being met. And very often, if you think of the three major needs are implicitly named, safety, satisfaction, and connection, very often trauma, particularly if it happens, if it's interpersonal, is a major injury and absence with regard to all three needs. It's a violation of safety. One element of trauma is we cannot escape. We cannot get away. And that sense of immobilization and helplessness is a primal challenge to safety. You can just see that with like animals, like a cat. Try to push a cat into a cat carrier. It doesn't like that at all. I've had that experience multiple times. It's a little bit like strapping a kid into a car seat when they're really young, and they kind of resist that too. But we don't like being immobilized. It's really scary for people to really understand what's happening. And similarly, trauma is loss of satisfaction, obviously, goal attainment. Your goals are being thwarted, and often it happens interpersonally. So what to do about that? So trauma creates craving. Obviously, it fuels craving. And sometimes as well what happens is that we shut down in various ways. And we shut down what the Buddha marked as healthy desire. There are these two words in Pali, tanha and chanda. Tanha is translated typically as craving. The root of that word is thirst. Something is missing when we're thirsty. Something is wrong, including potentially, lethally. Could be horribly, horribly wrong if we don't have any water at all. Chanda are wholesome desires. So sometimes what happens when we're traumatized is that our wholesome desires that benefit us and benefit others in perfectly okay ways, like trying to speak our truth, or the wholesome desire to have loving relationships, or to express love, to give what's in our heart to other people. These are wholesome desires to actualize our capabilities, to fully run at full speed, that we're capable of, or sing as we best can. These get thwarted. So I think part of the art with trauma is to start to understand some of the ways in which the way we meet our needs and our sense of what's possible in the meeting of our needs has been affected by those events. Just that alone is useful. How have I been affected by what happened? Remembering, I think it's from Maya Angelou, I could be mistaken, remembering this beautiful teaching that we can be affected by our history, but not defined by it. We are not stuck to that part of our life history and that part of our consciousness that involves the trauma, or complex, multiple developmental trauma even. So just that right there. We can explore it, we can understand it without being defined by it. And then also we can ask ourselves, okay, that happened. What about my wholesome desires? What are the longings of my heart that may have been necessarily frozen back then that I can thaw out today? That I can take little experiments with and little risks with well-chosen other people and see if I do express those longings, can it go better today than it did back in high school or preschool or in my family, right? Can I express myself in these ways? Can I try new things? Can I be bigger? Can I be larger? Can I stand in my fullness in various forms of, all of which are wholesome desires, all of which are chanda, right? And can I do these things and, in effect, expand the range, expand the field in which I'm not being defined by my trauma? I think of the teaching from Suzuki Roshi, you may know it, in which he said, I do not know if there are enlightened beings. I am certain that there are enlightened moments. No matter how traumatized we've been, we can always find enlightened moments in which we step out of the mental shackles of the trauma into wholesome desire, that we can express in that moment in a way that it has a kind of enlightenment to it. And for me, that's a path for which I have enormous respect for the people who walk it. It's not an easy road, but it's a good road. It's a true road, and it will lead you to a good place. And that's obviously just a part of what could be said about craving and trauma, but I hope that was helpful.
Wow, wonderful. Diana, we have a couple people with raised hands.
Oh, people are very kind in the chat. I appreciate it.
Yes, I hope you're seeing this outpouring.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Valerie, and thank you, Rick. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, excellent.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I wasn't going to talk about trauma at all, but you meant the question about trauma, and then you mentioned cats and holding, trying to hold them. So these two things came together in a funny sort of way while you were guiding us, where I've been having trouble with this sort of feeling love in my heart, right? And compassion, and just, it's like I'm new to this, and I feel like it's been a struggle. But when you were guiding us, I had this image come up where I took my cat, who is a traumatized cat, and I have my own trauma, right? And in my image, I took my cat into my heart, and just we merged, or there was a merging feeling, because I project my love onto my cat, right? Well, and then I kind of took it back and put it inside. And it was so wonderful. And then, of course, my mind come in and says, well, that could be a trap. It's like, maybe that's not a good way to go. And so I just curious about any reflection on, that kind of process of using imagery to get in touch, in that way.
Well, yeah, thank you for saying that. There's so much in what you've said there that's just really useful generally. I'm just kind of underline a number of really, I think, useful things. One is, first of all, an attitude of experimentation and inner resourcefulness. I think of our kind of inner temple in which no one can stop us from trying stuff and learning. Fantastic, right? Yay! Heck with them out there, the sticking their thumbs on us and, including in our history or broadly, structurally in our society. Inside our mind, we can find a fundamental freedom. And still there, only we are responsible. So it's kind of old school. On the other hand, the good news is that we earn the results. So you had a kind of a resourcefulness there, and there was a playfulness in it as well. That's another major thing. And technically, as our sense of playfulness increases, so does the activity of what are called neurotrophic factors in your brain that promote learning in the broadest sense, promote positive change. So if we're bringing a kind of playfulness, Henry's fantastic in this way, isn't he? He brings a kind of playfulness to practice, and that playfulness itself steepens our growth curve, our rate of healing in the process, so that part. And then with your cat, it reminded me in a sense of Tonglen, a kind of Vajrayana-ish sort of thing. It's not technically Tonglen because it wasn't about suffering, but it's that you were, if I understand you, you were expressing lovingness with your cat, and then in some sense returning that lovingness to yourself, And as a longtime psychologist therapist, I think immediately of very healthy things that kids do, little kids often, to survive karmic situations. They place the good outside themselves so it cannot be attacked. or robbed or plundered or abused. And then, so it's safe. And then they can bring it back into themselves, in various kinds of ways, including in their stuffed teddy, their animals, fantasy figures, angels, and so forth. Fantastic, fantastic. And I think the proof is in the pudding. Whoops. So your question is it tanha or chanda? In effect, is it problematic cravings, have poison fruit, or is it, chanda, wholesome desire? Certainly it felt like it is chanda. It's wholesome, your intentions were good, your skills were excellent, and you were not attached to the results. That's kind of the three criteria if you think about it. Wholesome ends, pursued with wholesome means, while still being fundamentally at peace no matter what happens. It's okay to have strong intent. It's okay to be vigorous, even fiery, in the pursuit of the good, while still retaining in the core of our being an unconditional inner peace, as something that we progress toward and rest increasingly in. Does that speak to you? Great. Okay, thank you. I see Brenda. Brenda, whom I know. Yeah, Brenda, excellent. So glad you're here. Popped on over. You came here to New Mexico, kind of, sort of.
It is so wonderful to have you back to back. And again, so incredible that again, you talked tonight about this whole idea of spaciousness. And I just also wanted to put in my 2 cents because you had mentioned people from diverse backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. And being an African descended person coming from a specific kind of spirituality, and I feel very much a resonance with your deep spirituality, if you will, if you don't mind my saying.
Oh, I get teary when you recognize that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm enveloping this idea of spaciousness, and I love this sense of looking to the horizon. The other place that I have turned to very much, and I wanted you, if you can, to speak to this, is this whole thing of going to the heart. So the sense of heart-centeredness as a means of awakening, as well as this spaciousness. If anything that you would say to that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a bit of a student, so I'm learning from you and others. I had a teacher for a number of years in the 1980s, Adi Da, Levananda, Da Frijan, no longer alive, who really talked about, he was sort of rooted in a Hindu mystical, tradition. He talked about the heart center immensely. And I have known, I can say as I have observed this, there's a more and more sensation going on in this part, my body in the last several years than there used to be. And I know people who are very attentive to chakras and openings, and then we have the deep teaching from around the world, the native people, first people, who often will talk about, shamanic, I'll use that word incredibly loosely, practices of heart opening. Something's really going on there. And I have found for myself that traditional practices work. Full stop. Great. And we've learned some things the last 2,500 years, including from many, many different traditions around the world, and let's see if that might be useful. So a couple of things here. First, if you think about it, going back to this model of more craving, less craving. Less sense of needs met, more sense of needs met. I call it red zone, fight, flight, freeze.
Right.
Green zone, peace, contentment, love. Okay. So relationship ticks all 3 boxes. A sense of positive connection, whether it's flowing out or flowing in, is a primal signal of safety. And for people who've been traumatized also, finding safety is really, really fundamental because it speaks to our most primary need to live, to survive. The next minute, the next second, the next breath. To live to see the sunrise, right? Everything else becomes kind of secondary. So as profoundly social primates, feeling part of the group, feeling that we're connected is a deep, deep, visceral, deeply neurobiological signal of safety. So heart ticks that box. Heartfeltness is also satisfying, and it's also connecting. So resting, I've really been exploring. I bet you're already doing this kind of stuff, Brenda, of bringing in, find your own words. Word for me, open-hearted is a very accessible sense. Warm-hearted, compassionate. I have to do a little more work there. Friendly. You probably know, I think, the root of the word for metta in Pali, loving kindness, is simply friendliness. Like a basic blessing. Like, I don't know you super well, but I have a basic friendliness. I feel your friendliness toward me. You wish me well. It's kind of goodwill rather than ill will, a kind of a blessing disposition, basically. Interest in seeing the good in the other, already seeing the good, willing to see more of the good. Just that orientation, kind of really simple, really basic. And bringing then that sense of heart into spaciousness.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Yeah, the two together. Wow. Or you bring it into a sense of kind of peacefulness, like warm-hearted peacefulness, or a loving strength. And you can think about more energized forms of this, including in social action, like a loving strength. And there are models for me, mainly through the American Civil Rights Movement. John Lewis, bless his memory, that feeling, right? You just got it when you're around them. Like, don't mess with this person. And, they're not at war with you. They're serious as heck, right? But they're not consumed by hate. Exactly. So that the two together, wow, loving, peace, peaceful, calm, warm-heartedness, loving, peacefulness, whatever. That combination I find super good. Maybe I'll just leave it right there.
Appreciate that. And I just, again, I'm a Qigong practitioner, and so much the whole heart meridian and like opening the heart to the sky is like a very basic thing that's done. And that seems to actually resonate with and combine your spaciousness talk with this heart to the sky.
That's beautiful. I'm gonna learn from that. That's awesome, Brenda. Yeah, because sky, space, heart, heart to the
Yes,
sky.
yeah. And that whole meridian. Thank you so much. Thank you always. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. This is great.
So glad I found you.
Oh, thank you for your teachings. All right, back to you, Valerie. How are we doing?
I think we could go on all night, but we have come to the time. And so, Rick, once again, just great, heart warm gratitude for your teaching and your presence. And everything Henry said has become very apparent. So thank you so much. And again, to everyone who shared in this evening, let's go on in this great work.
Yeah. And thank you all for your comments in the chat. I've been able to kind of scan them and see them and receive them. So thank you. Really, thank you. And so thank you, Valerie and Mark and everyone in Mountain Cloud. And I encourage everyone listening here to really, really appreciate the teaching stream coming through Mountain Cloud. Or Mountain Cloud. That's right, not Cloud Mountain. Henry corrected me once about that. Yes, Mountain Cloud. Anyway, thank you. Triple bows. Great. And we're out.